Mouthwashing is a piece of interactive media developed by Wrong Organ, the same developers behind the existential parasite musical How Fish Is Made. Instead of playing the role of a helpless mackerel flopping through rusted and fleshy corridors, partaking in fish-on-fish violence, and slipping on just a pinch of cum, we take to the stars with a cast of 5 characters employed by Pony Express, an interstellar shipping company with a reputation for cutting corners at any and all opportunities. The pilot deviates from the flight path for reasons unknown, directing the ship on a collision course with an approaching asteroid. A familiar flavor of cowardice, survival at the expense of everything and anyone. Sparks and steam spray from the carapace, a mounting militia of posters accumulating on the walls, the corporate eye ever present. In this place, a rusted tin can coasting through nothing, there are no gods to blame for this travesty, nor fanciful book to bring solace. The only scripture that can be found is that which is written on these wastes of cardstock. Eye-rolling corporate ethos, accompanied by some underlying threat. One little dismal statement, a wish, a loving gesture, housed by a cruel shell. I hope this hurts. Under the warm glow of an artificial sunset, they gather around the table. It's been 2 months since the crash, and the crew could be worse off. There's enough rations to sustain them for a few more months, granted less than the remaining oxygen supply at projected consumption rates. The ship's emergency systems deployed breach sealant, leaving a number of rooms inaccessible. Swansea, Tulpar's resident mechanic, ensuring the worst of the offenders is left untouched. And, of course, there is the underlying question of rescue. Will anyone come out this way in deep space? Will Pony Express take accountability for these poor souls? The odds are certainly stacked against the crew. They butt heads, frequently. Swansea's gruff exterior clashes with Daisuke's curious rookie nature, yet they coexist without major conflict. The ship's traumatized nurse, Anya, frequently placates to the domineering self-appointed leader and former co-pilot, Jimmy. As for the surviving captain, Curly, his background is a bit of a mystery for the time being. The group concludes that it is in their best interest to gain access to the cargo hold, even if it means forfeiting their paycheck post-rescue. Dwindling supplies and the minor inconvenience of death outweigh the alternative, if only slightly. We assume control of Jimmy throughout most of this story. His mind is already made on most matters. Selfless thought is, for the most part, off the table. Instead, his colleagues are left to devise most solutions and carry them out should they appear too risky for our courageous leader. Even as the player, we are just another subordinate. Given the crash is allegedly Curly's responsibility, it paints him as some sort of villain. His present form, the one which we see through the near entirety of the story, is monstrous. Anya is incapable of administering Curly's medication. The sound is revolting, and as a result, she requests that Jim do so instead. But even then, hearing and witnessing Jim forcefully restrain the helpless soul just to cram a few pills down his throat, it's enough to send Anya away in tears. She cares, but it hurts. She knows this more than anyone else on board. The promise of something more, given the individual commits their efforts to an entity, not a person. Wages worth living for, safety, and time for family. It's achievable by anyone, surely, right? After all, we come from the same atoms, the same origins. Yet, despite being 4th quadrillionth cousins, twice removed, division persists. We all want the same thing, regardless of class. Undeniable control over our lives and, to some extent, the lives of others. The salesman peddles his snake oil, promising equal opportunity without a particle of shared effort. He is diverting attention and taking advantage of petty squabbles that should not be, but they exist nonetheless. The problems of their own making run deeper than any of the men realize, and not one of them are willing to question the legitimacy of the short-sighted solutions presented to them. Instant gratification, sweet and destructive. To the surprise of absolutely no one, the cargo hold offers nothing of value. A forest reduced to a cubic jungle, each box filled with the same uniform 40 bottles of blue waste. Were it not for the sugar content, these might have been useful as a disinfectant in the event of an emergency. By the later months, multiple stacks standing as tall as the crew will populate the halls and lounge. It solves nothing, but there really isn't anything to solve. Hidden away in the cockpit, Jimmy finds Anya and Swansea discussing matters in private. Suspicion is roused, and the assumed subject of conversation disbands, and returns to Curly's bedside. Once more, as though trying to convince himself, he pins this entire situation on Curly, venting any stress surrounding Anya in particular, and the rest of the crew to a lesser extent. But this begs the question, having been some time since the crash, when will these pitfalls be a result of his own action and inaction? When will he take the helm? Why confide in a friend who he loathes? 4 months with nothing to show for. Really, survival doesn't seem all that appealing anymore. Daisuke, caught in his drunken stupor, laments, fearing his mother blames herself for her son's demise. Anya ponders her options until interrupted by Jim, and for the first time since the crash, he apologizes to her. Both are in search of some sort of release, though their reasoning could not be any more different. Internal plights of a kind solved by external means. This miscarriage of events is nearing the precipice. A lethal plummet awaits. On a more positive note, Swansea seems to be enjoying himself. Retrieving a handful of medication from the now cleared cabinet, Jim lashed out at Anya once again. Tired of her sentimentality, as he views it, he sends her off for the last time. Curly is subjected to compassion, genuine love, and understanding, if a bit distorted. An epiphany must have struck. Jim does not understand anything. Try as he might, he is no leader. He will never know the pain and pressure his predecessor endured leading up to and during his role as captain. Nor will he understand the extent of the damage Jim has done to both himself and everyone around him. They will survive this, Curly and Jim, in one form or another. "5 months in, what few rations are left are quickly drying up. And to make matters worse, Anya has locked herself in the medical bay, sharing an intimate space with Curly in her final moments. It doesn't take much to put two and two together here. Gaining access to the utility room is easy enough. Even the liver of an alcoholic has limits. Inside, a functional cryopod awaits an occupant. As for the vent, we have front row seats to seeing Jim's true colors once again. As opposed to taking the reins and climbing into the murder hole himself, Jim plays with Daisuke's insecurities. His desire to please his family and peers, to finally have purpose, to feel accomplished, to do anything right. Like every other event in this story, we watch as Jim manipulates his way through the trials. Daisuke will die a prolonged, painful, meaningless death. How selfless. Jim doesn't stop there. That would be far too self-aware. Somehow, through brilliant, bumbling debate, Jim attempts to push the blame for these grievous wounds onto Swansea. Understandably furious with the whole ordeal, he sends Jim to find disinfectant somewhere else. If only we had a potent medical-grade alcohol of some kind. Delving into the bowels of a collapsing psyche, the stairs and catwalks defy logic in the black expanse. At the base of the pit, the same sea of cardboard, untouched as it was months ago. But Jim is not alone, he never was. There has always been an invisible, threatening presence the blind, looming eye of the company itself. It stampedes in the direction of the slightest discordance which breaks the uniform silence. Under the UV light of the code scanner, the tool left to the captain and the captain alone, the hazard is made visible and the reality of shortcuts are made clear. They are barriers which the competent can see and avoid. The extra time and effort required far outweighs the impossibility of overcoming an immovable blockade. The easy way is not necessarily faster, nor any more reliable when compared to an alternative, less traveled route. Psych evaluations are underway. Curly, lost in thought, dots a course to the questions, answering the same as he had done before. An easy pass. He's tired, but couldn't sleep a wink last night. Something's been eating away at him, and his lack of transparency isn't making this any easier for either he or Anya. One psych evaluation remains. Jimmy. Anya is not looking forward to it. He rather sling depraved jokes in her direction, not necessarily directed at her, but certainly indicative of his cravings. Between the needs of Anya and Jim in both Big Swans and Daisuke in the utility room, Curly has a lot on his plate for this hour alone. Simple tasks, but tiring nonsense. Outside of utility, Jim hangs beside the door. Daisuke has gone and got himself trapped in an emergency sealant dispersal. The kid was just trying to repair what his horizontally challenged mentor couldn't. Anyway, Curly still has to have a private chat with Jim. I only bring this scene up as Jim's throwaway comment about closing the door and walking away, though unrelated to the discussion between Curly and Jim, is of some interest given what we know about Jim's behavior. Just a little something to take note of. An empty space under infinite possibilities. The sky is broken by the glow of the stars above. Curly's wet footsteps echoing through the empty chamber as he trudges through ankle-deep waters. It's uncomfortable, yet peaceful. But as Curly progresses deeper into endless choice, broken ladders and aggressive emergency warnings manifest. Their frequency growing as the blazing sun rises on the horizon, a new beginning beyond the top rung, a new ladder, running past those artificial barriers and embracing whatever comes next. Success, failure, uncertainty, blissful chaos, cathartic change. A blank room now opens to the man, having reached his end. Curly can have this absence of foundation, but for now, there is one minor imperfection on this otherwise clean slate. A singular loose end. The evaluation ends as soon as it begins. We aren't privy to anything from the papers themselves, but Curly does pose a simple open question. How are things? Jimmy has taken a liking to it, working beyond Earth, a place where he struggled for so long. The control that they have here as both a collective and an individual is empowering. Jim doesn't dwell on that for long. He's noticed that Curly is pained by something. A message from the head honchos of Pony Express interrupts this heart-to-heart between two friends. They may part ways now, but the news is best broken together. Everyone at this table will lose their job. In light of this, Jimmy takes it upon himself to speak on the behalf of everyone. Daisuke will return home and end up lost once again, continuing his role as family disappointment. Anya is without savings, and Swansea, being the age that he is running out of time to work. And Jimmy, he takes the greatest offense to it all, convinced that this is somehow Curly's fault, that he had wished this on everyone to allow himself to escape. But obviously that isn't true. Much like how Curly must bake, if you can call it that, his own cake, he is left to announce disaster on his own. No voice over a phone, no emails, no secretaries, nothing. Just a poor bastard without a say in the matter, left to take the backlash in place of the powers that be. He is both a catalyst and a punching bag for unrest. Frustration redirected to another commoner, whilst the gods ignore the squealing insects from their ivory towers. The company already knew this, that there was a risk of dissent, regardless of interpersonal relations. Why else would they arm the captains of these freighters with a singular revolver only accessible by them? Or, to be more accurate, whoever has a code scanner and knows where to look. Curly is a special case, or maybe he's not. He was quick to act when Daisuke got himself trapped in the foam. He got on well with wise, bitter old Swansea, even giving him a nickname. He was compassionate, willing to listen to Anya, and help her in any way he could. He saw that she suffered, and wouldn't wait for her to pull herself up. She wasn't incapable, but could certainly use the help she neglected asking for so long, much like Curly had done. The weight of everything, responsibility on behalf of the company, his colleagues, and his friends' projections, crushed him. It left him vulnerable. He is the manager of this crew, the captain of this ship, and despite his monstrous appearance that we're so accustomed to, he is as human as anyone else. Fragile, malleable, and destined to fail and succeed. Curly and Anya share a parallel. It isn't their fault for what happened to them. Anya, like Curly, had been trodden over and abused. There are locks on both the cockpit and the medical bay. The crew quarters are free range at all hours. It's no wonder she's so disgusted by Curly's writhing and gagging. Not only was she close to the man who suffers at the hand of her abuser, the sound of struggling and forced silence is reminiscent of an assault in the dark. We knew from the psych evaluation that Jim revels in the control he has out here. Like any other lecherous predator, he won't give up that stranglehold with or without a fight. And like any other skilled manipulator, he has an ace up his sleeve. One last hurrah to avoid any sort of punishment. This life is unsustainable. In spite of Jim's deflections, the guilt has burrowed deep into the sinew. This body-wide parasite cannot be extracted without taking a part of him so integral that he would cease to be. In this tragic, though deserved condition, the collapse of what remains, Jim has made his peace. He will do what he must to get the job done, to ensure the survival of his friend and avenge the deaths of his colleagues. He responds to himself accordingly. I think we're done here. No need to drag this out any longer. The perpetual curtain call teased in the very beginning has finally come. What remains is marvelous metaphor and sprinklings of succinct subtext. We'll be returning to slightly more obscure subject matter in future. Thank you for your time and support, no matter how brief. Cheers.